So welcome everyone. It's a packed room. I hope you all enjoyed lunch. I know it's difficult to drag yourselves away when lunch is very tasty, as it was here, so thank you to our hosts for that. My name is Sonja van Rensen. I'm a freelance energy and climate journalist here in Brussels, and I have the pleasure of moderating this event for you this afternoon. Entitled, This is How Europe Reaches Carbon Neutrality ASAP. And the idea here today is to have a bit of an inspirational event, looking at experiences from Sweden and three sectors in particular: transport, energy and industry, and district heating. And to use those examples as a springboard, I suppose, for ideas and inspiration, and also look at potential challenges for how Europe as a whole can decarbonize well before 2050. So Sweden is planning to do it by 2045. And of course, Europe as a whole is supposed to be doing it by mid-century. So the event's split into two parts. We'll hear these three Swedish examples. We're very short on time, so we're going to take just half an hour for that first part. And then we have a panel for the second part, so a separate set of speakers. And there we'll move from Sweden to the full European level, and I suppose from the more concrete, action-oriented examples to the more policy and political debate. So it's a lot to get through. The event is being web streamed. There were people who wanted to come and couldn't be here in person, so you'll also be able to re-watch it after if you want to supplement your notes or see presentations and so forth. There's an app that you should have received an SMS about, which contains things like a participants list, and I guess presentations afterwards and so forth. So all the documentation should be readily available, which means you can sit back, listen, and hopefully ask us some interesting questions. So with that, I'm going to hand over to our proper host for today, Torbjörn Hack, who's here as Co-Repair One Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative for Sweden. Please.
Thank you very much, and some very brief words of welcome from me. I'm very pleased to see you all here. Now this is working. It is certainly the right approach to show in about 1 hour that this is the way how to do it, and that is probably the sort of upbeat approach needed to face challenges in coming years in following up on that historic decision by the European Council in December on the goal of climate neutrality by 2050. And I think, thinking about this, if we're to be successful, this will probably be about combining the two perspectives of, on the one hand, an innovative, forward-looking, driving industry with, on the other hand, the regulatory incentive-setting public actors, like not least the European Union. And if we are to do that, we will probably look for a new sort of mindset, and arriving at that mindset will probably be the big thing in coming years. And in doing so, we will, as we heard, have some examples from the Swedish industry, from the electricity side, from energy, and from in the heating area, and from transports. And we will then hear the views of the actors in the European Union. And I'm very pleased to see here, of course, Pernilla Winhed of Swedenergy, Andreas Regnell of Vattenfall, Sesken Kadir of Kraftringen Energi, Åsa Pettersson of Scania, and from the EU, Mauro Petreccioni, the Director General for Climate. We have Hans von Steen, who is replacing Dieter Juhl from the DG Energy. We have from the Council Secretariat, Jaroslav Pietras, and from the European Parliament, Jutta Guteland and Peter Liese. You are all very welcome, and I hope that this seminar will be as inspiring as the title indicates. Very welcome to all of you, and I wish you all the best for the seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'd next like to welcome Pernilla Winhead, CEO of Swede Energy, and also chair of Norden Energi, which is Energy, you'll have to pronounce it better than I do, which is a Nordic collaboration on the energy front. She has over 20 years experience working in energy and also sits on a number of boards of energy-related associations here in Brussels. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sonja, and thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for hosting this very important seminar on how to reach climate neutrality as soon as possible here at the permanent representation of Sweden. EU needs to become carbon neutral well before the mid-century in order to tackle climate change, and Swede Energy is strongly supporting this ambition. Swede Energy is a non-profit organization, special interest organizations for energy companies dealing with distribution, supply, selling and storage of energy. We have about 200 members in our organization, and 2 of those are here today, Vattenfall and Kraftringen, and will be in the first panel here soon. And we're very proud of that. As you all might know, electricity and district heating in Sweden is almost fossil-free already today. However, other sectors in Sweden, such as the industry and transport sector, still is heavily dependent on fossil fuels. But that dependency is about to change, actually. Many industries have during the last year presented roadmaps on how to become fossil-free, and that is a part of being climate neutral according to the Swedish climate law in 2045. And these industries, they say that a main driver, a main enabler for them to be fossil-free is electricity, fossil-free electricity. We have done some analysis of these roadmaps, and we have found out that the annual use of electricity in 2045 will be 190 terawatt hours compared to 140 terawatt hours as it is today. So it's an increase in electricity use of 35%. The challenge for us is not mainly to produce fossil-free electricity energy, but to ensure the most cost-effective transition as a possibility for the society with maintaining both security of supply and competitiveness. In that respect, district heating has a key role. By heating buildings with district heatings rather than electricity, it really is the electricity system is relieved in critical hours. And if you also could produce this heat and electricity in combined heat and power plants, the system is relieved even more. District heating also has a great potential for bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, which will mean negative emissions in Sweden. Our district heating members have made a pledge that the district heating not only should be fossil-free by 2045, it should be have negative emissions by 2045. So it's a huge pledge, but also a possibility for the climate. EU legislation will set the scene for this dramatic change in the energy system for the European Union. The most important instruments for creating this is the carbon market ETS and the legislation in the EU effort sharing directive for sectors not included in the carbon trade, and also, of course, the national climate targets. Sweden Energy supports the Green Deal that the European Commission has presented, but most of the work is still to be done. We need to secure a high ambition in line with the Paris Agreement, which means at least 55% reduction of emissions to 2030 and a climate neutrality in the EU by 2050. The EU ETS needs to be strengthened to deliver carbon neutrality before 2050. This means that the EU needs to increase the target for reduction of carbon emissions within the ETS as soon as possible. For sectors not included in the EU ETS, the effort sharing directive and national climate target need to be increased to put them in line with the new ambition of becoming climate neutral by 2050. I really look forward to hear from the Swedish companies today on their example, how to get to climate neutrality, and also, of course, the high-level discussion after that. And thank you very much all for being here, and let us go forward together towards climate neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, also for some very interesting figures. So 35% more power use by industry in 2045, and also the district heating sector having committed to negative emissions by 2045. I'd like to, so we have a trio of speakers from Sweden now. I'd like to welcome the first one, Andreas Regnell, who's here from Vattenfall, where he's Senior Vice President and Head of Strategic Development. He's also a board member of Northvolt, which is aiming to build one of Europe's first gigafactory for electric vehicle batteries, and Hybrids, which is the project you're going to be telling us more about, which is an effort to make fossil fuel-free steel in future.
Thanks very much for that introduction. Just to make sure that everything is correct, I'm no longer board member of Northvolt, because Volkswagen took over when they financed the whole thing together with Goldman Sachs. So they are on their own now, even though we stay owner. Anyways, what I'd like to do is to kind of take a step back a bit. As you might know, our purpose and strategy is built on this, our vision that it should be possible to live a fossil-free life within 1 generation. And then you wonder when is that? Well, if you ask us, we will say around 2040 or 45. And of course, that means a lot for what we do with our own assets. We invest in renewables. We have a lot of fossil-free production already and we want to grow that. But also that it means that we work a lot with partners. And there has been a lot of kind of debate and focus on hybrid, but we also work in the cement industry, in chemistry, and also in refineries. So it's more of a pan-industry approach that we work. So with that, I'll just start in this end and say there is a lot of technologies listed here, but what we would like to say that if we want to decarbonize industry, if to simplify it grossly, what you do are essentially 2.5 things. Either you heat something, or 2 things. You heat something, either kind of low to medium temperature heat, so up to 700 degrees, or you heat something above 700 degrees. Or you use something to take out oxygen from in refineries or in iron ore production, so you need a molecule that can take out oxygen. That's essentially what you need to do. And if you look at what are the different technologies to do that in industries like steel, cement, chemicals, and others, there are a lot of technologies there. But the point is that if you look at the degree of readiness of those technologies, we come quite far in a quite number of areas. So either it's actually already a commercial technology to exchange gas boilers with electrical boilers. That technology exists, it's a commercially available technology, it's just to do it. And that only alone would be several hundred terawatt hours in Europe just to do that. And we would save a lot of CO2, provided that the electricity, of course, is fossil free. And the same for a lot of other technologies, that they are there or almost there. So the issue is not that we don't know how to do it. That's my first point. It's possible. However, what are then the roadblocks to getting it done? And based on what we've, in our discussion and what we see, I think with essentially 4 things in the first level. And first of all, it's just a mental barrier. Is this something I'll do when people force me, or is it something that I see as an opportunity? Or sometimes we refer to it, do you sit in the back seat or do you sit in the front seat? And our view is that more and more people or CEOs and board members and chairmen out there are moving from the back seat to the front seat, realizing that this is an opportunity and it's really, really dangerous to wait. That's one. So but it's still a barrier. Sorry, I shouldn't. The other thing is that there is a lot of capital locked in the existing technology. So of course, if you're going to move from one technology to the other technology, it's very easy, much easier to take a decision to invest in the new if the old is old. But if the old is new, it's much trickier, because then you have a lot of value on your balance sheet that risks becoming stranded. So if you want things to happen, you should go for those companies that need to change their technology or replace their existing assets anyway. And that's a bit of the story of actually hybrid, because SSAB's blast furnaces are relatively old. So it's relatively easy for Martin Lindqvist, the CEO of SSAB, to invest in something new compared to some of their competitors that have new blast furnaces. So that's an important. Transitional risk. So who will buy this new, potentially more expensive fossil-free product compared to the old? And there are many. I think Northvolt is an interesting, where actually the risk was very much shared between Northvolt and the customers that decided we need those batteries, so we commit to buying it from you. So before the factory was at all there. So that's a way of sharing risk, where the government was there, but I think it was more actually between customer and supplier. And then final thing is on existing barriers. I think it's to realize that yes, even though it's slightly more expensive, in the total value chain, it's not that big of a difference. However, I think this is something where we can list them, and I think there are discussions, and I would bet that 12 months from now, most board members and both CEOs will have changed their mind and kind of come over that barrier. And once everyone does that, the next one, which is actually to me more difficult to come over, is the access to fossil-free electricity. Because if you just do the math, just in the countries that we are in, there is if you combine the industry with the fossil, with the heating sector, there's 2,500 terawatt hours that needs to be kind of replaced by something else. And depending a bit on how you do the math, and we've tried to do the math. So this is an example. If it's exactly this, I don't know. But to do it, just do the transition in UK, then Germany, Netherlands, and Sweden, you need 70 terawatt hours of electricity per year. From now on, every year until 2050. And that's not where we are. So we're about a third. And that's even before we're talking grids. So I think that today we have a discussion on whether it's possible to produce things fossil-free or not. I think that discussion, if you ask me, will be more or less over in 24 months, because it will be so clear that it's possible. And then we'll run into this beast, which is how do we create or produce all the fossil-free electricity? How do we move it to where we need it? That will be the next. So finally, hybrid, it's there. This is the pilot plant in Luleå. It looks like it's at night. It's just that it's not. It's winter, so there is no light, more or less. It's for real. We will start testing it after summer. We're doing the first steel production as in pilot. It's real, and it will happen. And we have a line of customers that want to buy this output. So this it's super exciting, and it's just the beginning. And we need a lot of electricity. The good thing is that there is a lot of fossil-free electricity in Sweden. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any questions to Andreas? Okay, I have one, because you said, the big challenge is going to be this extra 70 terawatt hours a year. Well, you're an energy company. Have you got any ideas on where it's going to come from?
We have some ideas, of course, but it's just that the money is there, but you need permits. You need to just pace up you need to have I think someone mentioned there's a different mentality, a different perspective that is needed. And if you have the perspective, we need 70 terawatt hours a year and not 20 terawatt hours a year, that has a lot of implications on how you do permits, how you do auctions, and a lot of things. And that mentality needs to change.
Okay. And you said you have a long line of customers ready, waiting to buy the fossil fuel-free steel. How much more expensive is it going to be then? How much more are they prepared to pay for it?
Well, we haven't signed any contracts, but the first volumes, I think price will be a secondary issue. The question is then when we get to the larger volumes. But my strong personal conviction is that when the product exists, and as long as it's not kind of 2 times expensive or 3 times expensive, as long as we talk 20, 30, 40%, I'm very convinced that demand will not be a problem.
Okay, thank you. A final question from anyone for Andreas? I don't see one, so thank you very much. Thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome Sezgin Kadir, who is the CEO of Kraftringen, which is one of the largest regional energy companies in Sweden, centered in the south of Sweden. He also has almost 20 years' experience in the energy sector and previously held various other positions, including notably in the Aon Group. Yeah. Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Hey everybody, my name is Sezgin, and as Sonja said, I'm heading one of the regional energy companies in Sweden, Kraftringen. And we are one of the largest, but also the 5th largest network operator in Sweden. And today I would like to talk to you about our transition towards a carbon neutral future. And actually, we took quite a big step already 2018 by becoming fossil free in our power and heat generation. And we are still working on that, and I think definitely, as Pernilla said, by 2045, I think in our case, earlier than that, we are aiming to be more negative in our carbon footprint. And in total, we have invested more than 200 millions to reach that goal, and 200 million euros. And every year, we are investing approximately 50 million euros to develop our infrastructure. And at Kraftringen, I am together with my colleagues and my shareholders aware of the climate challenges we have on a global level. And we are also aware of the goals that we have on a European level, on a national level, but also on a regional level. And we believe that these goals that are set to avoid a future climate crisis are correct, and we are very, very convinced that we have a role of being the regional and the local enablers and executors of solutions to reach those goals. So, and we are very proud of that role, and I will try to give you some examples of how we are working. This is something that we use on a daily basis within Kraftringen. It's the energy hierarchy that is classifying the different energy options, and it's prioritized to assist progress towards a more sustainable energy system. And Kraftringen is working with clear principles for our priorities, both together with our customers, but also in our investments, to climb towards the efficiency, to the top of it. Basically, what we are doing is that we are moving from here up here. And presentation is an example of a project or a solution that is being delivered or we are delivering. And we believe that in the future we have to somehow change our business models and our offerings to move from down there to up here. And what is needed? Yeah, I think one of the very obvious things that we see is that as a traditional energy company, it's not possible to reach that level on your own. And I don't believe that anyone can do it. So we have a lot of cooperation together with our customers. So it is obvious for us that we have to move closer to our end customers. And this is what we are doing. Every single part is actually happening.
You need to speak in the microphone for the live stream.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry. And I will give you the example of recovering energy and from Lund. What you see here in this picture is a new district being built in Lund. Lund is one of the university cities in southern Sweden, and the two big circles you see on that picture are world unique research facilities. One is based on electrons and the other one is based on neutrons. And do you know what is special about this area? It's unique, but it's also unique from energy point of view. In this area, the excess energy that will be produced or generated will be almost 10 times higher than the heat or the energy that will be used in that district. And what we are doing right now is we are developing low temperature district heating. It's actually based on innovation, and it's the new and the future way of doing district heating and deploying it in this area. We have already come quite a bit. We have already 2 customers connected to this, and we have contracted almost all the developers in that area. And it is based on innovation, and it will allow us to recover those 9 times higher energy that will be produced, or the excess energy, to distribute in this area and use it in this area, but also in the region. And we are doing it by developing our fossil-free district heating already. And we are actually, this is a EU project, we do it together, and we are open and we are sharing our knowledge with the colleagues and those who are interested. This is one of the customers. It's Max 4. It's a synchrotron radiation research center. And we are providing them with cooling and heating supply and recycling the excess heat that they are generating in their processes. So how do we make it happen? And I think this is the 3 important things that we would like to point out are, in the future, if we want to deliver solutions, we can, as an energy company, as a future energy company, we cannot work on our own. There is a demand, and there is a clear path that we have to do it together with other ones, together with customers and partners. And the second thing that I really would like to point out, yes, I think we heard that when you have a big chunk of assets, it's not easy to change them. But in our case, we are actually, our core business, our existing core business is allowing us to develop it. So we are keeping developing our core business and what is existing. Our traditional heating, district heating, is actually enabling the development that I showed you. And the third one is actually, you may know about Sweden on a national level, but even on a regional level and local level, we are really keen on setting tough goals and cooperating with the local governments, the local policymakers, and the regional ones. So I think that is crucial as well if you want to achieve and take those steps. So this is how we are making it, and we are carrying on. And our goal is by 2025 be fully fossil-free in our entire value chain. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions to Sezgin? While we wait for questions, I invite people standing at the side, if you want to move in and get yourselves a seat, you're very welcome to do so. Yeah, do we have a microphone for questions? Yeah, if you could just get it, I can pass it.
Thank you very much. I have a question regarding the project you described in Lund. It was very interesting, and you talked about a new way for the district heating here, where you can, as I understand it, have a lower temperature than the existing normal temperature that you need to. Could you please elaborate a bit on why that is possible? I heard about something similar in Stockholm about when you can go lower in some existing new buildings than you can do in old buildings, but it would be interesting to hear what's happening here.
Yeah, okay. Very good question, thank you. I think the normal temperature in a district heating system is around 90 degrees Celsius. In our case, we have lowered it to 65. And we could have lowered it even more, but there are two things. The one criteria is the risk of bacteria in the system, and the second one is the hot tap water. Otherwise, we could go lower. So this is one of the reasons why we cannot lower it. But the reason why we can lower it is actually the cooperation we have with the developers in the area. They are designing and developing their buildings and their systems so that we don't need to, and we're supporting them, so that we don't need to send out 90 degrees. So it makes it easier to recover the energy and recycle it from these facilities that I showed you. But we are also putting it back into the normal or the traditional district heating system, and even there, then we don't need to add a lot of energy to increase the temperature. But our goal is to develop it and to be able to use the recycled energy without adding too much energy to higher the temperature.
Okay, so it works. So it's something that could work for other district heating providers, I guess, in other parts of Europe, but for new build areas, you need to work with developers or designing buildings that can accommodate a lower temperature.
I wouldn't say it doesn't always have to be new built areas, but I think you need to work together with the developers. So it's not something that we can do on our own only. So you have to have a close cooperation with the customers and partners. So I think that would be the most important, and we have done it together.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I haven't seen any more questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We move then from district heating to transport, and I'd like to welcome Assa Petersen from the Scania Group, where she's head of public affairs and sustainability for the past 6 years already. Again, someone with 20 years experience in this case, the energy and transport sectors, both in Stockholm, here in Brussels, and previously worked at Vattenfall.
Through that. Thank you very much. Very nice to be here. I feel very at home both in the energy and the transport sector, and the transport sector is definitely becoming a part of the energy sector and a large demander of electricity going forward. That's what I will talk a little bit about. I will click here. So Scania, we are a producer of trucks, buses, and also industrial and marine engines. So that's what we do, but we see ourselves very much part of this ecosystem of transport and logistics, and roles are changing at a rapid speed in our sector. We have 3 big trends: electrification, connectivity, and automation that are affecting us in a pace. I started at Scania 6 years ago almost, and nobody talked about electrification. It wasn't going to happen in our sector. So only in this little time period, things have changed a lot. At Scania, we're committed to driving this shift. We definitely see ourselves as sitting in the front seat in this development. And we want to see this happen fast. We are a Swedish company based in Sweden, where Sweden has put up a target to decarbonize as a country, as we know, until 2045. But the transport sector should be already at a 70% reduction in 2030. So is this possible? That's the big question. We definitely think it's possible. We're working with a 3-pillar approach in our work. Energy efficiency has been our legacy for many, many years. That's what we're really known for. We work with the best fuel efficiency in the business. That's how we compete. Our customers choose us because of low fuel consumption. They make money on that, and it's also a CO2 saving, of course. But we all know that's not going to be enough. That's not going to drive this shift or transition our sector. So we need to get rid of the fossil fuels. Actually, it's very simple. We need to shift away from the fossil fuel in our sector. And saying that, we should also know that we are completely dependent on the fossil fuels in our sector today. At Scania, we are around, I would say, around 4% of sales in alternative solutions today. And already then, in 10 years' time, we need to be somewhere else if we're going to reach the Paris Agreement targets. So how do we do that? Well, we look into a lot of alternative fuels and electrification. Electrification for heavy transport is coming. Battery development is going at a rapid pace. But infrastructure is not in place. The products are not out there yet, and there is no infrastructure. Let me get back to that. And alternative fuels, there are some more alternatives. I will also show you this range in a minute. But what we should not forget when we're doing this transition is the third pillar here, the smart and safe transport, which is actually digitalization and connectivity in our sector. At Scania, all our vehicles are connected, and with that we can follow them. We collect data from each individual vehicle. We know where they are, what they're loading, what their fuel consumption is, and thanks to this we can plan the transport system a lot better. Today there is a lot of waste in the transport system. A European truck in average is filled to 60%. So there is a lot of, just by coordinating the transport system better, we can save a lot of fuel and CO2. We work a lot with biofuels and alternative fuels at Scania as the here and now solution. We know that electrification is coming, but there is simply no infrastructure in place yet, so we cannot do this today. Probably it will take another decade before we see this on a system level in Europe or anywhere. We don't have 10 years to wait with CO2 reductions from transport, so we have to do something in the meantime. And this is how we respond to that. We have the broadest range actually in the market that can use alternative and sustainable biofuels. We should remember always talk about sustainable biofuels because not any biofuels would be good enough to use in this system, of course. The impressive thing with biofuels is that you can use the rolling fleet. All trucks that we have produced since 2011 can run on biodiesel. It's the same chemical molecules as in diesel. So, I mean, it's just about the availability of sustainable fuel. So basically, we have the possibility of becoming close to fossil-free using renewable energy in the trucks already today. Then a lot of people tell me when I say this, it's like, yeah, but why ramp up production for an industry that is going to electrify? Well, because there are other industries that will not be able to electrify, like aviation and shipping, for example. So we need this basis for biofuels production already now, and we can use it now, starting to lower and bending the curves in our industry, and then shift this production capacity towards other industries when we start electrifying. Electrification, well, nobody knows exactly what the system will look like for heavy-duty vehicles. We see in passenger cars a huge and fast development with a lot of stationary charging. We also know that, for example, in Sweden, by electrifying only the highways, we would get rid of almost half of the CO2 emissions just by counting on the fuel consumption today on the highways. So if we start with the highways and build electrical roads is one solution. You can work very quickly on CO2 reductions. But of course, this is a system solution, so we have to, we foresee large infrastructure investments in this case. And not least, like Andreas was talking about, the grids. We cannot forget the grids in this aspect. Pernilla was also mentioning that. The grid capacity is a huge deciding factor in electrifying also our highways. Yeah, I think I can stop there.
Perfect. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you very much. Once again, are there any questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. Could you tell us a bit more about the point you made about the nature and availability of sustainable biofuels? Because that is a huge bottleneck.
It is indeed, and of course it looks very different in different countries. The country where I come from, and Scania comes from, in Sweden, we have a huge availability of sustainable biofuels from the forest industry and also from residual waste producing biogas. This I see as a huge potential for Europe as a total. I mean, we all produce waste. So this would be, from a life cycle and circular perspective, I mean, it's a hidden treasure we're sitting on with our waste to produce biogas. So there I see actually no conflicts even with the sustainability issue in biofuels. But also ramping up famine land production for biofuels. The capacity of the biorefineries in Europe is not used to its full capacity. I saw a figure that it could be increased with 60%. So I think there are things we can do to produce the sustainable biofuels in Europe and create a more bioeconomy-based approach, including this also in the transport system.
Are there particular, I don't know, based on your experience, particular parts of Europe where you do see real, I suppose, potential for sustainable biofuels? I just came back from a biofuels conference in Germany and it was a fairly gloomy atmosphere, let's say, for all kinds of biofuels. So I don't know, are there parts of Europe where would you say?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, in Sweden we already use 20% of biofuels blended in the diesel. So that's quite a high percentage already and growing because we have a regulatory steering mechanism growing that every year. But I would answer Eastern Europe to that. I see a lot of famine land potential in Eastern Europe. And also a need for jobs and growth that the bioeconomy could potentially address via the agricultural economy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then I'd like to call up and invite our next 4 speakers to come up and take a seat. I think we'll all sit down, and that way we'll save some time later without moving up and down. So it's Hans van Steen, Jaroslav Pietras, Jitte Guteland, and Mauro Petriccione. So maybe I'll stay standing. So the idea was, as I said at the start, to move now from Sweden to look more at Europe as a whole, and also to take this debate to the political level. So Sweden's doing a great job. There are obviously some circumstances that maybe make it easier for Sweden than other parts of Europe, but the goal is for Europe in its entirety to be climate neutral by 2050, and obviously 2030 is the next major milestone in that. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give us just a couple of minutes. Please stick to just a couple of minutes, 5 minutes max, and that will give us time for you to respond to one another and for us to take some questions from the floor as well. And we're going to have a closing comment from Christian Ruby towards the end, so I want to make sure we have enough time to fit you in, obviously. I'd like to kick off with Mauro Petriccione, who's here from the European Commission. I guess a familiar face to many of you, Director General for Climate. Originally spent a lot of time working on trade within the Commission. He's been with the Commission for many years. And I guess the question is, can Europe actually do this? I mean, from what we've seen, we've had some first insights into the new Commission. We've had the Green Deal. We've also just heard a few days ago that the proposal to raise the 2030 target is probably going to be put back by a few months. So we're getting off to an ambitious, but there's always room for more. So can Europe do this? Are we going to manage? Okay, so
it's as simple as that. Now, how? Given the time limitation, I'll spare you references to the various communication. I hope you have all read the Clean Planet for All and the Green Deal communications. If you haven't, I'm shocked, flabbergasted. I invite you to do so. They actually do make interesting reading. Having read and written many communication, I wouldn't say the same of everything the Commission has ever done. But these two are really worth having a look. What does it go through? It goes through many of the things we just heard in the previous panel. Fundamentally, energy is the key to our system. But let me make a point. If we wait until we have a full supply of clean energy to start cleaning the rest of the system, we'll be still here at the end of next century. We have to do things in parallel. Take transport. Of course, we're not going to have, even if we electrified all our transport tomorrow, it will still run on dirty electricity. But that's not all we're doing. We are at the same time cleaning up our transport system and our energy supply, and we have to aim at converging them by 2050. So this is a complex system-changing exercise, and like all system changes, there are synergies, there are opportunities, but they don't all come at the same time, and you can't do this change in a linear fashion. If you try to do it in a linear fashion, you end up either failing or taking far too long, and we don't have that long. We have long enough to affect the transformation, but we don't have any time to waste. Energy industry, and you heard about the hybrid example, which is a splendid idea, and we are looking at that very, very closely. We can transform our energy production. We can transform our transport, but first and foremost, we have to clean up our electricity. And that has to be entirely fossil-free by 2050. We will not get there in a completely clean fashion. Many of our member states want to get out of nuclear as well. There are different views in some other member states. They all want to move to renewables. The pace is going to be different. And in the meantime, the faster you get out of things like coal and oil, we may have to employ more natural gas. The question is not, will we have more gas in the system? The question is, do we plan now how to get out of this gas by 2050, or does the industry develop a way to take CO2 out of that gas? I think the biggest change that this policy is having now is how do we move from a logic where reducing emissions only a little bit, it helps, is a good thing, to avoiding dead ends and to policies which are capable of getting us to zero in 30 years. They're not the same policies. Things which are good for reducing emissions, hence my question on sustainable biofuels. Sustainable biofuels is an area which is certainly useful, but is it a definitive solution to part of the problem, or is it a transitional measure? And that's the question we have to answer in the very next few years, because what we do to support that policy, which we will support, changes depending on whether we consider it as a very long-term solution, something which is going to last us another 50, 60 years, or whether it's something that will last us another 10, 20 years, but by 2050 will have been replaced by something else. What is the Commission doing now? You all know the plans. Now let me say a word about what's going to happen in practice. First thing to watch for, climate law. Climate law will be tabled by the end of next month. Then we will pass the ball to our friends in the Parliament and the Council and see how fast they can agree on that. Sorry, this is not a criticism. European laws are complicated. We are complicated, but we function. We do get things done. Now we need to learn to get things done faster than we ever done, and that's not easy if you're running a system of 28 today, 27 unfortunately at the end of this month, democracies, plus an overall democratic system with democratic institutions. That takes, the fact it takes a couple of years to adopt the law as compared with a single democracy, well, I don't think it's scandalous. But still, we have to learn to do it faster, and both institutions The Council and Parliament have made huge efforts in that respect. But at some point you do need a democratic debate if you want to get things right. So let's see how long it takes to adopt the climate law. We're trying to make it as straightforward as possible, because it's important to have that symbol clear on the table and adopted sooner rather than later. That's not what's going to change things in substance. It may stop us from doing some stupid things that we would do otherwise. What will change is the legislation we will table, frankly, next year. By the summer, and yes, you heard from the head of cabinet of my boss that the analysis to justify what changes we're going to propose is proving complicated. So it may be a little bit later than the middle of the summer. But we will have, as Frans Timmermans promised the Parliament, our plan before we go to Glasgow, well before to Glasgow. We will be able to tell you what the Commission will propose to change our legislation. Because we need to make sure we will have a difficult discussion within civil society, in the Parliament, in the Council. We can't afford to have a controversy about whether we're getting our facts and figures right. We have to get them right, and then we will have a discussion on the policy, and it will be a healthier discussion than it would be otherwise. That work is going at full speed. We're confident that we will have this impact assessed plan, as the Green Deal communication calls it, and it will be solid. Whether people will agree with it, that's a different story. That's the point of having a democratic debate. But it will be solid, and we will be able to stand by the figures and the facts that we will put on the table. And then we'll have to craft that legislation. And we have to assess the impact of the specific legislation on member states, on individual sectors, on our society. So as the Green Deal communication announces, you will see the final versions of this legislation by June 2021. This is all about the 2030 targets. In the meantime, there is a huge amount of work that needs to be done now, or at least as soon as the Council and Parliament approve the multi-annual budget, on where are we going to put our money for research? Where are we going to put our money for infrastructure? Grids, yes, absolutely. But not only those grids, not only electricity grids. Do we need more gas infrastructure? Do we need infrastructure for decarbonized gases? How much of it? Where? The pattern of production and of energy and use of energy has changed. Let's just take the example of Germany.
I have to ask you to start wrapping up.
In Germany, you will not have, you have a very different pattern where most of the energy will come from the north of Germany and most of the use will continue to be in the industrial south. So you need a complete change. That's only one of the biggest examples we have. So watch this space, but this is going to be a continued exercise. The Commission is going to come up with one proposal or the other on a regular basis for the next 18 months, I would say. And all this fit in, you'll have to look at the overall picture to see whether it makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So at least three points I take away, as you say. So on the 2030 proposals, those will be ready well before Glasgow, so in good time, and I appreciate the Commission you need something solid to build on. And then what you said, yeah, it's important to distinguish between transition measures and measures that work in the long term, and we may need more gas in the intermediate term, but how you categorize a certain measure will depend on what kind of policy support it gets finally, so that categorization is crucial. And coming back to your first point, electrification, you emphasize we need to do things in parallel, so we can electrify as a first priority, and yes, it won't all be clean electricity, but the idea is by 2050 it will be, so we don't need to worry too much in the meantime if it's not 100% green just yet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but okay, that's what I take away. I'd like to move on then to Jutta Guteland, who's here from the European Parliament, sits on the Environment Committee, and is Swedish MEP and coordinator for the Socialist and Democrats group on environment matters. The Parliament has just adopted its own position on the Green Deal. So a few words from you, if you'd like to comment on what we just heard from the Commission, the need for speed, and does the Green Deal set us on track to where we want to be in 2050?
Thank you, Sonja, and thank you for letting me come to this seminar. I must start by saying that I think for every one of us, it's very obvious that we live in the time of transition and that things are happening fast, and it's really the society is changing every day now. But for me, as member of the European Parliament, I must also say that it's a bit of a transition here, because we have, since there has been, of course, lots of reports from the UN and IPCC panel, and also the young movement around the world on the climate, we have constantly been in this focus of speeding up the ambition towards the Commission and the Council and the business. And now I'm in a situation here where I hear we want to deliver more. That's what the business are telling. The Commission delivered the Green Deal. That's really big, and it's a game changer for real. I really acknowledge that and see that. And I also think that the Council will come. I see some process even in the member states. So we are in a transition, really, for real. And for us as the European Parliament used to be the progressive part of the EU institutions, this will also actually change us and what we need to do now. Now we need to really focus on delivering on the legislation and work with the Green Deal, both all the proposals that will be delivered to us to handle in the upcoming years, but also existing legislation, what needs to be done there. And of course, it's very exciting to be here, and it's very exciting to be a Swede and see what is happening back home. I must say that we have businesses that several years ago said this is impossible, this is not coming fast enough, and now I listen to all of you and also go to different study visits back home in Sweden, and I see so many interesting and really changing projects that delivers. And it was very interesting to listen now when Pernilla Winhed told about the negative emissions in 2045, and then also when we got from Kraftringen and your project in Lund and describing how the district heating can be used. And I think this is something that we need to talk more about, how we can use the district heating, and also have projects in other parts of Europe than Sweden, and see if this can help to transist and make sure that cities and big regions become more efficient. I think this is very hopeful, and I hope it's possible to do it in a big scale and in different places of Europe. Of course, me, who was also shadow in the ETS reform back in the last legislature, I am very happy with following the situation with fossil-free steel and hybrid and what's happening there. And to mention, I would like to go there, of course. And then, of course, Northvolt with all the opportunities for electrification is also very hopeful, and not at least Scania, when you describe what is happening also with the trucks. That is really amazing, and something that I would not have personally thought a couple of years ago. So that being said, to really warm you up and make you like me, I will be ready for questions, of course, but I look at Sonja and I know you want me to deliver on what we think is important on the Green Deal when it comes to the European Parliament. And I think we delivered in our resolution a bit more concrete measures or what we would like to see, but there is no secret that the ambition is really important. We want to have a higher target for 2030, and we would like to make sure that the Commission would like to see a reduction of 55 to 2030 and not to have this 50 in between. That's important. We would like to see, when it comes to the ETS, a reform that will deliver also when it comes to the reduction factor, so that it goes faster. We would like to see that we do something about the the part that is when it comes to this discussion on the road transport and the ETS. For us, it's very important that we don't lower the ambition, and we have today worked hard with setting the standards, the CO2 standards, and we don't want to mix it up with the ETS and get a situation here where we don't go fast enough, both for the industry and energy sector, but also for the road sector. We think that would be negative. So I would like to hear more about how we do that in a better way. And then a last thing that maybe not relating to you, or maybe it's the shipping sector. I just would like to mention that. I think when we see what is happening in all your businesses and what you're doing, I think it's not suitable to see that the shipping sector is actually not having ambitious targets. And I think the Commission is on the right track there, but we would like to see it happen also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for the positive words. So clearly, the Green Deal is a game changer, which is not a given for the Parliament to come out and say that. I think ambition, no surprise there, as you say, Parliament pushing for a 55% target for 2030. ETS, keeping the vehicle emission standards intact, and shipping, I hear in other quarters too, is indeed getting more attention from policymakers. So thank you for those priorities. We go then from Parliament to Council with Jaroslav Pietras, who's Director General for Environment, Education, Transport and Energy at the Council of the EU, and previously worked in the Polish administration in various positions. I won't go through them all. He's got a long and distinguished history. So Council member states, of course, are not fully aligned yet. We're still waiting on Poland to sign up to the climate neutrality by 2050. I know obviously you can't speak on behalf of any individual member state or such, but you obviously sit in. I guess you have a good flavour of how Council views the 2050 goal. Is Poland going to come on board? All this whole discussion around what's going to happen in 2030. I also read the other day the Commission only actually has half or just over half of the national climate and energy plans it should have had by the end of the year. So if there's a delay anywhere, as I guess is often the case, we're likely to find it amongst individual member states. So can you give us an idea of how Council is going to take this agenda forward?
Well, if I look back to times of 2007, when the first climate and energy goals were established, I think we had plenty of discussions, plenty of worries, but the reality has been proved much more optimistic. So I hope that with current situation, discussion between member states, you also have plenty of worries and discussions, how to go, where to go. But the reality is we have to make reality much more optimistic than this was until now. But I am observing different councils. It's not only Environment Council. Most of the discussions are between people who are convinced. So when I'm here, I've got also a feeling that we are talking about those who know very quick where they want to go. Whereas when you look at the different councils, and I observe not only environment, but also energy council, transport council, also I have colleagues in agriculture and in finances, you could see and you could feel a difference in opinions, what it should be done and how it quickly should be done and where we have to go. And maybe it will be colleagues that should start first. Very often it is much easier for environment ministers to agree, then for energy or transport ministers to agree, because motivation and political aims are lying with environment ministers, whereas means of delivery are very often in different places, which is energy production, which is transport, heating, all other sectors, industrial production, so in competitiveness. So here is a significant part. And obviously, one have to also see another element, that, and it starts with the leaders as well. We had a discussion in European Council in December. European Council has made us clear that it is the EU as a whole goal to become a carbon neutral by 2050. This has been agreed by all the member states. However, one of the member states, the member state that I know the best, has said that for this specific country, they cannot commit at this moment. I cannot represent the member states, so I cannot tell you when and whether they will say they will be ready. However, they have agreed, as Poland, as a member of the EU Council, have agreed that the EU as a whole should become carbon neutral in 2050, which is an important component of interpretation what is European Council decision. However, when I look at the politicians taking part in this process, I can see very easily that they've got multiple aims in their minds. You know, they don't only think about making Europe carbon neutral, but they also, and it's not only that they want to be elected next time, but they also have to look at the industry and how a country is developing. They have to look at the social aspect. They have to look at the consumption. They have to provide security of energy and all those things. So they do not have one aim. If there would be only one aim to decarbonize Europe by 2050, this would be an easy goal. But it is not so easy. And obviously, you know, when you look at the industry, and I have listened carefully to you, you said if the product is 20, 30% more expensive, there is no problem. If it's 3 times expensive, problem. I can tell you that if energy is 20% more expensive for poor people, this makes a huge difference. So the question of a social distribution of the cost is something which is incredibly important in this process, and I think it has to be taken into account. And the politicians, when meeting and discussing these issues, they have to respond also to this type of concerns. So it's not so easy to simply say, let's go for things. We have to look at the all aspect that, and obviously here what comes is the finance. Is a question of from where money for this process can be taken. And the finance has got a double element. First is something which is invested for the future. And here you have to find the ways how to invest in a green or carbon-friendly technologies, how to make sure that you've got enough money for that. And then the number of works that are being done, including taxonomy and including some other elements. But also you have to look at the money that have been already put in place, which are frozen in assets. And then you have to avoid, you have to minimize stranded assets, those who will be lost because you change technologies. And I think, again, politicians are looking at these elements as well. So you look at the cost, at the transition, and the social implications. But there's another element that these issues are not only in relation to investments and to companies. And I think what you do is very important, because when business is showing it is possible and it's trying to make it viable economically, this makes it easier for politicians to say, well, we see the businesses behind it. But generally changes, and I liked your slide, which says it starts with a mental element. The changes are first virtual, in mind, and then they come to reality. And that's how things also will happen here. But it also relates not only to production, but also to consumption. It's a way how we are behaving as a consumers. And here is also a change which has to be brought not only by regulation, but also brought by change of the values that we have in our own minds and how we behave. Generally, and I'm trying to
I have to ask you to wrap up. Yeah.
Generally, this is going to be a kind of a radical change to economy and to society. It is a change which is a kind of a revolution, and this revolution has to be ensured by regulation. Very seldom in the history of mankind, revolutions are being brought by regulation. The law never ensures revolution. This time, it has to be different. It will be by regulatory framework that will require changes, and then they will happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, a revolution by regulation. That's not something that we probably have historical precedent of. And thank you too for pointing out, I mean, the new Commission's goal is for climate neutrality to serve as a lens for all activities, everything from policies on jobs and growth to environment. So it sounds like within council, I mean, at national level, that's something that also still will need to take root. And also for emphasizing the social parts of the transition, and the just transition mechanism, which was only just launched, I think will be a crucial point. If Europe as a whole is to decarbonize, it's got to be Europe as a whole, and it will be crucial who pays and who benefits, and there will be losers as well as winners. I come then to, last but not least, our final speaker, Hans van Steen, who's stepping in for Ditte Juel Jorgensen, who had to be with her commissioner today, unfortunately. He's been acting director for research, renewables, innovation, and energy efficiency at DG Energy for over a year now, and been with the Commission for much longer than that, always working on energy and energy technology. So we started off, Mauro said, I mean, energy is the primary sector when it comes to climate neutrality. So what, I guess we've read the Green Deal, hopefully, we've read the annexes, we've seen what's coming up. What would you highlight and draw our attention to as the next milestone in EU energy policy for climate neutrality?
Thank you, Sonia, and good afternoon to all of you. So it's always a challenge to speak at the end, especially when there's so little time left now. But I think Mauro has already pointed out very well where the Commission is in all of this. It's quite clear that this is something that we can do, something that we must do, and we also know broadly how to do it, because that was set out in the long-term strategy at the end of 2018. And just maybe to highlight two things which, at least for us in DG Energy, are really critically important here. One is energy efficiency. It hasn't been talked so much about today, but we tend to somehow take it for granted. This will happen, but it will not happen. It will not happen by itself. It will have to be very, very strongly encouraged. We will have to have much stronger regulations in order to bring us to where we need to be on energy efficiency. And just to remind you, we need to, by 2050, reduce our energy consumption to half of what it is today. This is not an increase in energy efficiency or an improvement in energy efficiency. This is actually a reduction of the actual levels of energy consumption. This is very, very dramatic. The second thing to highlight, I think, is renewables. The energy system will have to be driven by renewables by 2050. There's no doubt about it. And the figures that come out in all the scenarios are around 80% or more renewables. A lot of this will be wind and solar, variable renewables, but we also need other types of renewables like bio, energy in various forms, and I think we've talked a little bit about those today. So what are we doing about all this? Some of the things were announced in the Green Deal. One thing, I think, on energy efficiency that we really need to do is to look at buildings and housing. We need to increase the renovation rate quite dramatically. We need actually to double it. We will come forward with a so-called renovation wave strategy very soon under this mandate to try and figure out how that can be done. It will be helped along by another key strategy or strategic goal of this Commission, which is digitalization. Sometimes these things are not seen in the right connection, but there are enormous synergies between decarbonization and digitalization that needs to be really hooked into. Of course, digitalization also means that we will spend a lot of energy on data. data centers will become very important energy consumers. And I was just thinking when we heard from one of the speakers earlier about the low temperature district heating grid in Lund, that this is also something which is now being proven with waste heat from data centers that can go into district heating systems with temperatures as low as those you have in Lund. So this is going to be, I think, very, very important. On renewables, there a lot of it will be electricity because, of course, electrification will continue. Probably Christian will confirm that when he speaks at the very end of today. So a lot of renewable electricity, a lot of it offshore. Just to give you the numbers there, we have today something like 25 gigawatts in the North Sea. The numbers that we need to get to 2050 is between 300 and 450. I mean, this is just almost mind-blowing in terms of ramping up. And of course, this will have enormous implications for infrastructure in that particular area. Bioenergy, as I said, it's one area where I think we sometimes tend to think that this is not really that important, but it is actually very important. Today, 60% of the renewables we use in Europe are bio, coming from bioenergy in various types. They will be needed, especially in those hard-to-decarbonize sectors that we focused on today, like transport and heating. And so within, shall we say, the energy transition that we're looking at towards phasing out fossil fuels, we need another transition, which is from first-generation bioenergy into second-generation waste-based. I think we can do it, but that will also require significant investments, and we need to make sure that the right signals are there one way or the other. And as Mauro said, that it's not such an easy thing to sort out and get right. I'll leave it there because I know we're running out of time. But maybe one last word. We need to look at the energy sector in its entirety. This is what we now are looking at under the heading of sector integration. We're looking at energy, industry, transport, agriculture, and trying to explore the various synergies that are between these sectors. And there's a lot of potential there, which I think in many places in Europe is not really harvested. So I think that's something that we need to do much more than we are today. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions to our panel? Let's see, I see 2 hands. Those are probably the only 2 we're going to have time for. Let's take those 2. What happened to our microphone? Oh yeah, there it is. If you just tell us who you are and if who your question's for.
All right. Hi, my name is Carolina Cornen, and I am a researcher at the VUB here in Brussels. I have a question here for Hans, our last speaker. You talked about the digitalization and how the increasing energy demand from data centers kind of goes hand in hand with that, and mentioned that this is a waste heat producer that we might be able to use for district heating. What I wonder is, how are you gonna push data centers operators to take part in that? Because what I see is that data centers will like to go to cold, distant places like Luleå, for example, because there they have free heating. But then they move away from the place where people live, for example. So how does that go? A renewable-based data centers want to be far away from people, but district heating kind of requires that you have nearby demand for heat. So do you have any comment on that? Thank you.
Go ahead, yeah, because we're going to need a sec for the microphone to move to the next person. Here, but you can start to answer.
I'll answer it straight away. Well, I won't actually answer it because I don't think we have the very precise answer to that. But you're right, of course, to say that if we are going to use the waste heat, for example, from data centers, it requires these data centers to be relatively near to where the heat is in demand. So that is going to be a challenge. But since a lot of these data centers will still have to be built, there could be, shall we say, regulation to where to locate data centers in the future in such a way that the waste heat could be used. I mean, I'm not saying that this is something that the Commission could do, but it's something that needs to be considered, especially if in some countries, data centers are going to use maybe up to 10 or 15 or even more % of the electricity. So we're talking about really huge consumers of energy, and it's very important that that energy is spent or used in a very efficient way, and that involves also using the waste heat that will inevitably be produced by these by these data centers. So it's a very good point, but I don't think we have the answer to it as of yet.
And the second question is here.
Thank you very much also for organizing this great event. It's been very interesting. My name is Ariane Richter. I'm from the German Perm Rep. I'm energy attaché. And I have a question to Mauro Petritone regarding the 2030 targets. You said there will be an agreement well before Glasgow. So if you say you will present your proposal after the summer, do you then expect the process to go through Parliament and Council before Glasgow, or will you just present the Commission's proposal at Glasgow? Thanks.
Before Glasgow, we have promised we will announce what legislative proposal the Commission intends to propose. What we have on the agenda is vast. Even just the ETS, it's potentially revolutionary because we are looking at bringing into the ETS the 4 large sectors that were not, they've never been there. And there were good reasons why they weren't there. So this wasn't an arbitrary choice. Now we have to look at, are the reasons still valid? And to pick up a point that Jutta made, if you take road transport, my conviction is that ETS alone cannot decarbonize road transport. Does ETS play a complementary role to regulation? Quite possibly, in which case it would make sense to bring it in. But that's what we're looking at. We will know what we want to propose around the summer, and we will announce it. The actual legislative proposals, a proposal to reform the ETS directives will come next year. And then when they will be adopted, well, you heard the promise for delivery, and we count on it. That's where we are.
Okay, so what we'll know well before Glasgow is what the Commission proposes to do about the 2030 target and how to
what precise proposal the Commission intends to do. We will explain whether we intend to propose an extension of the ETS to road transport and why, and if not, why not. My expectation, some things have been looked at in quite some detail, like road transport or shipping. Bigger question is the construction sector. That is an issue which, frankly, the answer is entirely up in the air because it's something that nobody has even looked at in practical terms, and that is much more uncertain. Road transport, if you look at your own country, there's been a lot of work done on what does it mean to bring road transport in ETS. So we have a basis to build on.
Jutta, and then
Very
I'm going to invite Christian to...
I must say, as I mentioned, I think with the targets it's very important to be clear and also ambitious and in front of Glasgow. And I think that the Commission could probably deliver, and we could also probably deliver. But I think for the Council, that's where we might need some more rapid work. I heard now that the Presidency wanted a climate law to be adopted in the beginning of the summer, but this is very linked to the target, and of course we then need the Council to also move here. So I think this is a message also to the Council.
Okay, we're running out of time. Christian, I'd like to invite you to... Yeah, go ahead. You've been listening patiently, diligently taking notes. What do you take away from this discussion?
Well, the first takeaway, I was a bit intrigued by the title of this thing, ASAP. Much as we want to decarbonize fast, normally when I tell my employees ASAP, I don't expect them to come back and say, I'll get it to you in 30 years, no problem. So we need to go fast, but it's also, even if we need to go fast, we're looking at a long-term challenge. It's a marathon we're on. I've been in a couple of conversations recently, yesterday with the head of cabinet of Mr. Timmermans, and he told me that the gas lobbyists all come to him and say, well, the electricity boys, they have such an easy job, it's done. And I just want to caution here that everything we're doing here is pointing back to electricity, or a lot of it at least. Just to recap, we've heard a lot of numbers. Doubling down on decarbonization means doubling up on the output of electricity. Doubling up, that's a lot. We'll come back to the volumes, but also to the implications of that challenge. So let's look at some of these sectors. I think what Mauro said was very important. We're moving from an incremental approach, little by little, to a more disruptive approach, frankly, where things will be much faster and have to be much faster to deliver. And I think this is a big challenge. It's an opportunity ultimately for our sector, but it's also a challenge, and we shouldn't be intimidated by this challenge. We shouldn't underestimate it either. That's very important, striking that balance. Transport, we've talked about it. I think that when we look at what's going to happen in the next 5 years, mission critical to this transition is that we create a seamless, user-friendly transition to electromobility for the normal people. If this goes awry, then they're going to lose faith in this project. If we can't do it with that sector, why should we be able to do it with all the others? And we have to be honest about the fact that even if automated driving is the buzzword of the time, we need to see politicians and the Commission grab the steering wheel a little bit on making sure that the infrastructure rollout happens as fast as required for this to go on. So specifically, please make sure that we get a tangible, concrete plan and funds to make sure that we have 1 million charging points at least by 2025. Then what about all the other segments we've been talking about? Maritime, heavy transport. We need to find solutions within the next 5 years to fix these things. The regulatory measures to do it, let's talk about it. Will the ETS fix everything? I agree with you. Can it play a role? Yes, probably in these other segments. But essentially, it's about shifting the fuel and scaling up radically the amounts of synth fuels for the heavy segments. Again, where does this point? Back to electricity. Because the synth fuels are going to be based on electricity. The hydrogen will be based on electricity. Heating, I think, was a very encouraging example from Lund, and what it also showed to me is that even if we are the electricity boys, we also acknowledge that the heating solution will entail a component of district heating. It will entail also a component even of gas. We will look at a sector integrated approach. We believe that, however, if you want to scale up and do things much faster, there's no way around looking at accelerated electrification in the heating sector. Why? Because there's no chance of decarbonizing gas so fast. So the renovation wave that Hans was talking about needs to have a component of electric heat pumps. Otherwise, it won't fly. The other part of this is very true, as you said, efficiency. The good news for electricity is that electrification actually provides a significant amount of absolute energy savings once you shift to those solutions. And we need to look at these two elements in tandem, and we need to transcend our thinking about energy savings and see what kind of energy we save. We need to save the black energy, and then we need to use more electricity. Remembering, doubling down on decarbonization means doubling up on electricity. Industry, fossil-free steel, still, again, points back to electricity. So remember that even if we have the technologies to decarbonize our sector, we're looking at a significant scale-up of these technologies at the same time. And I think this whole word of scaling is one that we have to remember and think carefully about in the context of industry decarbonization. First of all, the strategy for industry in Europe should firmly put the strengths that we have, offshore wind at the heart of the industrial development, 400 gigawatts. That adventure is a huge one for the wind industry, but it also entails a component of how the heck do we transport those amounts. And if we crack that nut, we have a huge possibility of improving our position in other markets there. So I've been playing around with this word, scaleovation, so free for you to use. We need to scale some solutions that we don't know yet. So we need to innovate them, and then we need to scale them at the same time pretty much. How do we do that? That's what we're going to do with the innovation money, if you ask me. First of a kind projects that put the integrated decarbonization challenge at the heart, build the first of a kind, and then industry can replicate. And we need to see that money flow fast. The last thing, so all points back to electricity. So what about that electricity challenge? First of all, we need to double up on the output. But how do we do that? Well, we know, first of all, that renewables will provide the bulk of that. 80% probably by 2050, that's your electric numbers, that's the Commission numbers. That also leaves another 20% that we're going to need quite badly on the transition way, and also at the end to ensure the flexibility. What it also means is that we have to invest in those grids. We really need to invest not only in the transmission grids, also in the distribution grids. We need to double investments, and we need to see money flow from that, because otherwise we run into the challenge that Jaroslav was mentioning. What about the people? If energy prices go up too much, if we just raise the tariff on grids and, let's say, finance the grid investments that way, then we might run into higher electricity bills and public pushback. So we need to find money in the coffers of the EU and member states to help finance the grids. We need to look at the 10E regulation. We also need to reinvent the tariffs, by the way, but that's something for member states to do. So we have the technologies, but we also have a big challenge in front of us in the electricity sector. So while the Green Deal is all about looking beyond the electricity sector and decarbonizing the others, they all point back to us. We mustn't forget that challenge. We have to make sure that we tackle that challenge in unison with the others. Last few words, if you allow.
People are going to start leaving in a moment.
Don't go.
Not because of you, but
yes.
You've got to wrap up.
So, wrapping up, I think what's really encouraging, just a small anecdote from my own life. First time I came to Brussels 10 years ago, I told my head of cabinet at the time, I want to create an alliance with industry. I was in the Hedegaard cabinet, and he just looked at me, and he took me down to Business Europe and had me listen into what they thought about higher targets in the short term at the time. What's really good in the last 10 years is that industry has turned and is now determined to lead the charge and play along. So let us, look at this challenge, daunting if it is, but still doable. Let's not underestimate it. Let's not be intimidated. Let's make it an ambitious Green Deal. Let's make it achievable also. Let's remember that electricity will be at the heart of this transformation, and let's do it ASAP. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. A closing word from Pernilla then, and you're all allowed to trickle out.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming here, and thank you for all of you who have participated, and also thank you to you, Sonja, who has guided us through these hours. I have listened very carefully to the presentations and the discussion, and it has been very interesting, I think, and I also think it's been very hopeful that it will be possible to go to this carbon neutral Europe in 2050, and probably a way before for that as well. And it's very hopeful to see the industry, both what Christian said about how the industry has moved during the last 10 years. It's an enabler for this whole transition, and it's very important an enabler for it. I believe that we need to see the energy system as a whole. Electricity will be a very important part, but the sector coupling with other sectors will be very important, and also makes it possible to make this transition more efficient than it otherwise would have been done. So having this holistic perspective of this issue is very, very important in the future. The last remark is I truly believe that the energy sector could be an enabler for this transition and make a great contribution to a fossil-free society. And that will also make it possible for Europe to continue to be a leader in this aspect and be the leader that we want to be and what we also can be. So with that hopeful set of mind, I leave this seminar, and I hope you got also some interesting reflections with you back home and some inspiration. So thank you very much.